Welcome to another mailbag session. As I said on some previous videos, there are a lot of mailbag items to get through because you guys have been asking so many questions, which is good. You know, that's how the community expands. But remember, guys, these are questions and answers you guys leave on the channel, and I think they're worthy of more discussion. But before we go, to get going, there are the normal parish notices, which is if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe icon. If you want to be notified when items like this get posted to the channel, that's the bell icon. Consider supporting the channel over on Patreon. The address is down there somewhere, as is the Facebook and Instagram feeds. But that's enough of that. Let's get back to the video. The first one comes from Tesoro, which I'm sure I've pronounced wrong. Yo, Mr. Tech Guy. That's how it starts. In response to a video on the Roland MX1 USB ports explained I did at the beginning in January 2019. I have a TB-3, a VT-3 and a TR-8 and a System-1. How can I plug them all into the MX1? Being as one USB is powered, thanks to any knowledge would be good. This the MX1 and having one powered point has always been a bit of a bone of contention with many MX1 owners. But that aside, there are videos on the channel about things like ergonomics and being able to power things from separate USB hubs. What you've listed is 4 Aira devices that you want to plug into the MX1. Great. Now, all of those Aira devices, well, let's put it this way. The TB-3, the TR-8 and the System-1 all have external power supplies. So you don't need to power them via the USB port. In fact, in regards to the TR-8 and System-1, I think you would struggle anyway to power them from the USB port, but that's a different conversation. The VT-3, I think, can be powered from the USB port, as can the TB-3 can be powered, because I've done that. That was a pattern I used very early on, but I tend to run everything now mains power because it's just so much easier. And I don't use batteries either, so I think I can't remember whether the VT3 or the VT4. One of them actually has battery capability on it. But the basic mass surrounding the MX1 power supply means that it's basically not beefy enough to run them all. The TR-8 and System-1, as I said, pull too much current, so you can't run those. And as just said about the VT3 and the TB-3, they could be powered, but then I'd use the mains power. Like I said at the beginning of this, the MX1 really wasn't thought through. I think it was kind of aimed at that sort of jamming DJ style environment where you wanted a drum machine to put beats on and a bass line to put beats on, and then you were possibly going to have some sounds coming in from a sampler or something else, record deck maybe. And it was sort of kind of meant to be this sort of live mix environment. It's kind of not really doing what we think it should be doing now, or what a lot of people have bought it for. So, but I will put a link to a video I did on powering these 3 instances. So I'll put that below this video, so you can go and watch that if you want to. But the short answer is you can't run them all from the MX1. You can run a USB cable from each device to the MX1, and you can get the sound in that way, but you can't actually power them up. And the other thing is to make sure you're on the latest version of firmware for the MX1, because they've done a bunch of fixes. So there's a video again below this that will give you the firmware video where I did the update. Hope that answers the question. Okay, next one comes from Brian Allen. Now, Brian Allen, I will put a shout out to Brian Allen, because Brian Allen runs Sector 101, and if you have a Yamaha synth, specifically the SY85, he does a bunch of memory modules, and he also does a bunch of flash modules, cards, etc., for that range of synthesizers. So if you haven't been across to Sector 101, go across and have a check out what Brian Allen does. So in response to the Yamaha SY85 Part 6 video I did about 2 months ago, yeah, June this year, 2020, where I I acquired a fully working SY85 and then spent 6 videos actually telling you guys how it needed to be fixed. But one of the things I did do is I actually put in the SYEMB06 non-volatile memory modules into that synth, so I can actually store non-volatile waves in addition to the sort of normal RAM or ROM stuff on the synthesizer. So Brian writes, thank you for featuring Sector 101 SYEMB06 module. I have a guide how to use non-volatile memory in the system SY85 here. I will put the link below the video. A very quick shout out. Brian, no problem. As I said, quite fully working, but quite happy to sort of put the shout out and support somebody else who's in this legacy space. So the non-volatile memory is essential to make the SY85 fully loaded. So if you've got an SY85 and you want the non-volatile memory, it's not pennies, it's pounds, but go across to Sector 101 and buy it from Brian. And the next one comes from KRS-T Bedford Studios, another studio owner. Response to the mailbag I did on the FC4A Yamaha pedal, MX1 design, System-1 sample rate, and Digitac and MX1. That was, again, June this year, June 2020. And they write, agreed, Roland make great innovative products from time to time, but their aftermarket legacy support is atrocious. Other people have said this. I really haven't had much interaction with Roland personally directly, but I have to be honest and say the way that they have dropped support for things and the way they are issuing patches for things is particularly poor. Okay, so that's my view. It would be better, and it would be better to use the battery states in the boutiques for additional FX. So, as in, take away the batteries, guys, remold the case, and put an additional circuit board in there that actually does stuff that the users are asking for. That's kind of what he's saying. And I've said this before on the channel, and I'm going to say again, my biggest concern with the whole the new batch of stuff from Roland is everything is dependent on USB being plugged into. I mean, yes, there is an audio out, but you know, it's kind of dependent on the USB being plugged into the computer and presenting the channels of audio and recording, being able to record into your DAW that way. And that is a real concern for me, because what I've seen is that Roland have started dropping support for USB devices because things like Catalina come along, 64-bit drivers required, and if you've got an older device, you upgrade to Catalina and boom, you can't use that device anymore in that scenario, and that I find is quite a concern. You've got something that's perfectly serviceable and you can't use it. You know, you can take the audio feed, but you can't use it with the USB, and you can't send MIDI down the USB. It's not a nice situation, and I find that really frustrating. And I really feel for those guys of you who've been on the Catalina video and commented that you can't get your stuff to work. I've not experienced it personally at the moment, but then I think a lot of my stuff is much too old. Because back in the good old sort of 70s, with good maintenance, this stuff is still working, but it doesn't rely on having a USB port. You know, so, you know, MIDI was MIDI worked. You know, all this stuff that's sitting behind me, there's a synthesizer there, there's a synthesizer here, there's a couple of bits and bobs there. They're all MIDI'd. There's no USB there, And you know that if you plug a MIDI cable in there and plug it into another device, as long as the MIDI is not broken, it will start sending note data down, up and down. Yes, it's not as functional as the modern USB MIDI or the standard that's now MIDI 2, but you know what, guys, this stuff works. You know, I have seen some. I said earlier, it hasn't affected. It has affected me because I had the iPad app for my Jupiter 80. And when iOS updated and they dropped support for the Jupiter 80, guess what? The app doesn't work anymore. It's so frustrating. So frustrating. Haha. Anyway, we are where we are. And hopefully somebody will, somebody bigger in the industry with a bigger size 9 than me will start naming and shaming these suppliers into actually maintaining support for these platforms, because you, the musician, have paid good money for it. And I think this will be the final one for this session. I'm trying to keep my mailbags shorter at the moment, so they just run to about 10 to 15 minutes rather than having some really long ones, which I've had in the past, and it sort of kind of doesn't, just trying to reduce them down a bit. This one's from K. Thomas. I wonder if that's Kenny Thomas. No, it can't be Kenny Thomas. In response to the Yamaha SY85 Part 5 disk drive replacement video that again was done in June 2020, and I was going to say Kenny writes, but I don't know whether your name is Kenny. Would this new drive work on the PSR-620? What do you think? The 620's drive is a Matsui belt-driven EME 213YN drive at 720 kilobytes. Uses a 24-pin flat ribbon cable. Now this is interesting because Yamaha and a number of manufacturers used kind of the same, well, definitely a number of Japanese manufacturers used kind of the same disk drives in synths produced around the same time, but they didn't all use the same disk drive. So you do have to be a little bit careful. But the drive that was in the SY85 was an EME 213 YV. And it's not uncommon for manufacturers to use the last two letters of a part number to specify which instrument or which application that thing has gone into. So while the model number looks the same with these two digits not the same, and given the fact it's a 24-pin flat connector off this drive and it's made by the same manufacturer, while I can't be 100% certain that the drive I replaced, that drive in my SY85 will work in your PSR-620, do you know what? I'd be pretty sure it would, because the spec, having looked at the specs, they're pretty much identical between the two drives. But again, I can't say hand on heart it will work. But on the singing side, the specs are pretty much identical. The synthesizers keyboards were produced around about the same time. They're both 720 kilobytes. They both have the same daft flat 24-pin connector that was specified by the machine. So to be honest, it's very possible that this drive would work in your 620. In fact, I would say it's probably more than very possible, but I'm not going to give you a 100% guarantee it will do, because I haven't asked that direct question of the guy who sold me the drive, but pound or penny it will. And that's, said the mayor, was that. Live long and prosper. See you on the next one. Bye-bye.